Welcome to another edition of Mbogi ya MaWriters from the Multimedia Library of the Alliance Française de Nairobi. Soyez les bienvenus. Let me begin by apologizing for the rather subdued atmosphere on our set because COVID-19 has taken away our habitual audience. But that doesn't mean that the conversation is going to be any less interesting as we discuss who will catch us as we fall. A novel described as a powerful tale of love and politics by the Library Journal, and it's written by Iman Verjee, who is right here beside me. Welcome.
Thank you.
Right, where to begin? Well, perhaps we can say that you've written a book published by One World Publications of 10 Bloomsbury Street, London, 57 chapters, spread over 439 pages. Why, I would like to ask, I know that in this particular edition, I'm going to focus on description and dialogue. That is why do people choose to describe what they do as novelists, and why do they have their characters say what they say? So those are sort of components. We've been going through them and sort of checking each list with different types of writer. But why was your novel published in London?
So I did my master's in creative writing in London. I studied at City University. And during that time, my thesis was to write a novel. So I wrote another novel. My first novel was called In Between Dreams. And that was my thesis for my master's. And after I finished that novel, I found an agent through the university, and they found me a publisher in London. And so I published it with them.
Right, well, that's a sort of trick question because everybody who comes on to Mbogi ya MaWriters complains about how difficult it is to get published at home. So, and it's, you know, the nirvana is, you know, out there, and we're really hoping that this will change. So I'm going to give you an entry point to tell us a bit of self-revelation. We're here to discuss books, but
okay.
if you will, what are your credentials then for writing a novel set in Kenya? Tell us a bit about yourself.
So I'll tell you a bit about myself, but I won't say that I have credentials to write a Kenyan novel, because I don't think that you need credentials to write a novel set in any place. But I grew up here. I'm third generation Indian Kenyan. I was born in Nairobi. I studied all the way through high school here, and I went away for university. And when I came back, I was 26 years old. And when I came back, I wanted to find a way to reconnect with the place that I was born in. And the only way that I could think of doing that was to write a novel, which is why I wrote Who Will Catch Us As We Fall. Because I had been dying to read a book that focused on Indian Kenyans, a contemporary Kenyan book that focused on my experiences, and there weren't any that I could find, so I just decided to write it.
I would say that you would agree that the minute, we'll talk about sort of jargon descriptions later in your own book, but the minute a Muhindi, for us, decides to write about Kenya and Kenyans, you have immediately become a spokesperson. You've immediately become an ambassador. So the way you describe us must be the way all, quote unquote, Muhindis perceive us. Would you take that on board?
No, I don't think that that's true, actually. I would say, and I have had people ask me that before, and I would remind people that this is one book, one story, in a sea of a million possible stories.
Well, in fact, it isn't a sea, Iman. It isn't a sea. Well, there aren't that many.
I'm not saying published.
Yes,
I'm saying
yes.
People have stories.
Right.
I still have many stories to tell about the Indian Kenyan experience, right? So puja is not how all Indian Kenyan mothers are. My mother is not like puja. So maybe in the future I will write a story about my mother. But this was one story. And a story I thought was important to explore because it's an issue that I believe that we as a community hold certain prejudices, and I wanted to address those.
I'm going to come back to prejudices, stereotypes. Okay. One of the stereotypes is that every single South Asian must either be a pharmacist, a neurosurgeon, and you've let the side down. You've let the side down and become a writer. How did your parents respond? It's a bit like you deciding that, I don't know, you're going to do something totally without issue, without success, without monetary success.
So actually, it was my father who encouraged me to go for the master's degree in creative writing. So I did my psychology undergrad, and I was trying to find something to do. And so I sat my LSAT because I wanted to become a lawyer, a human rights lawyer. And I've always been really passionate about writing, and my father knew that. And he told me, I actually heard about somebody who did a master's in creative writing. Do you know that those exist? And I said, no, I don't. And so I went online and I applied to about 10 or 12, and I got into City University, and it was him who pushed me, and my parents who encouraged me throughout the entire journey to do something that they truly believed that I could be successful in.
So tell our viewers what it is to take a master's in creative writing, because when I think of all the all-time greats, when I think of the authors who impressed me as a lad, when I think of Dickens, when I think of Dostoevsky, when I think of Tolstoy, writing these huge 1,000-page books, they never went to creative writing school. So what did you gain from that? Why didn't you just tell your story and be done with it? And the follow-up question you can do as well, is that therefore you're writing to some sort of knowledgeable formula. There's a formulaic thing. If I do this on chapter 1, this on chapter 2, have my protagonists meeting under a tree in chapter 5, I have a novel. Because I learned it in the same way I'd have learned calculus.
So I would say that I believe I was taught how to write a novel. I went for my master's in creative writing, focusing on a novel because I knew at the end of it, the thesis was to have completed a novel. And I learned the techniques, I learned about characterization, I learned about dialogue, I learned all the tricks and all the tips that you need to know. When I was younger, I've been writing since I was 6 years old. My sister and I, we completed a horror story when we were 12. So I've always had a talent, I've always had a love for writing. But I think that if you want to write a novel that is of publishing standard, there are certain things that you need to learn. There are certain things that you can be taught, because at the end of the day, writing is a craft. And it doesn't matter if you learn that craft through a master's degree like I did, if you learn it through a workshop, if you learn it through creating your own group of writers and having them edit and read your stories, it doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, it's all about learning, it's all about practicing if you want to reach that expert level, which I think you need to get to before you get published.
Right.
Yeah, and in terms of a formula, I definitely do not agree there is any formula. No one can teach you a formula to write a novel. Because
but they can teach you some things to look out for.
They can teach you the fact that you need to have a plot, and they can teach you techniques to drive that plot forward. But if you were going to ask me, is there a formula, I would say for my first 2 novels, the loose technique, the loose formula I used was one that I discovered moving between past and present. That was my technique, because I found that it allowed me to create this kind of tension, this kind of really great suspense that made readers want to be invested in that story. But it doesn't work for my 3rd book. And so now I'm having to go back and find a new formula for myself. So what works for me doesn't work for other people. What worked for me in my 1st book might not work for me in my 3rd book.
Understood.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you, before we go to the book itself in slightly more detail, the title, Who Will Catch Us As We Fall?
Yeah, mouthful.
Your title, your editor's title?
My title.
I wonder what goes into, well, I do know, because I choose titles for things that I write. What went through your mind before you came up with this? Is this a quote from Rabindranath Tagore? Is this from the Gita?
No, it's my own.
What is this wisdom? Who will catch us as we fall?
For me, titles are a very difficult thing. Even for my first book, I went through a very long process. Because if you think about it, this book is, what, almost 500 pages. And I have to encompass everything in that book in a catchy title of five words. So I actually had to go through 2 drafts before I came up with my title, because I really had to understand, what am I trying to say here? What am I trying to ask here? And who will catch us as we fall, for me, represents the question that I try to pose throughout the entire novel, which is, who is going to fight for us if we don't fight for ourselves, and if we don't fight alongside each other, right? Who is going to create a better future for our younger generation if we keep allowing people first to steal from this country, if we keep indulging in corruption, if we keep mistrusting or shying away from people who are different from us, be it the color of their skin, be it where their grandparents are from, where their grandparents were born, or even their sexuality, any kind of difference. And that was what I really noticed when I came back, is we played a part. Our citizens have played a part in where this country is now. But the best thing is that we have such a power to change that trajectory if we work together. And if you noticed in the book, I talk about Piogama Pinto.
Yes, indeed. I'm going to read a lovely passage about that.
So these men and these women who have fought for our independence, what did they fight for? They fought for a better future. And that's what I'm trying to say is, when we come together in unity, then hopefully we can build that future.
But Iman, that story, as you well know, is anchored. It's not sort of didactic, love thy neighbor, we're all God's children. It's anchored in a love story. And it's anchored in a love story which I would say deserves to be described as a taboo love story, in the sense that it involves an Indian, South Asian, Kenyan girl falling in love with a black African Kenyan.
Yes.
Which, by rights, maybe there's a statistic there. Maybe that's only happened in all the people that I can think of, couples of that nature. They don't exceed 10.
But that's the point of the
book. So were you making it, was it a fantasy?
No,
a
it's not a fantasy.
World, one fine day?
No.
Well, expand.
The point of it is to say, this is not taboo. This is not fantasy. This happens, and this should be allowed, and there's nothing wrong with it. And to give people an insight into what that kind of relationship is and how it works. And to tell people maybe who are in interracial relationships that you're not alone, that it happens, and there's nothing wrong with it. And actually, I think it's such a wonderful way for people to come together and to unify.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're in. We have to. So that's a sort of preamble, and we've got 20-odd minutes to deal with description and dialogue. I am going to read you a few passages. Let's start off with description first. I'm going to turn to page 138, and the Kenyans at least will recognize this bit of earth. In Kibera, there were no government clinics or hospitals, just as there were no government schools or other public services. Close to 200,000 people left to fend for themselves, forgotten by everyone who lived in the nearby city. Most providers of health care were charitable organizations, churches, or do-gooding volunteers from abroad, hungry for adventure. And most of these institutions were severely understaffed or provided limited services so that one had to wait for days before receiving care. Often it came too late. I think, oh my goodness, that's a bit harsh. Don't want to live there. True or false? Is that a true depiction of the whole of Kibera?
I don't think it's a depiction of the whole of Kibera, but as I said, it's one story of one person's point of view when he looks at it. And the way I described it there is exactly why I was telling you I wrote the title. I do feel the characters in my book feel like they've been neglected by the people who should care for them. And that was...
So they are representative of a social stratum, and the reader is... But then whenever people sort of watch The Constant Gardener as a film, and they see the train sort of going through Kibra and saying, of all the things that they could make, why did Le Carré have to describe it in such negative terms? You're on the side of the downtrodden so that you're going to make the society look really, really bad. Is that a generalization?
I mean, I think that in the novel, I looked at every aspect of that.
I was depressed by the Kenya which you depict.
Okay.
There was little to redeem us, I must say.
I didn't feel like that when I wrote it. I think there are certain aspects of Nairobi and of Kenya that I look at and I wish that they were different. But I think that living here has given me a great hope, and I think this is a great city and a great country, and we can do great things, and that was my intention going in.
But again, from the writer's craft, I'm just wondering, again, Kenya, the American tourist, whenever you get to Kibra, you say, avoid turning left, because somebody's going to sort of nick your phone. There are flying toilets everywhere. You could be sort of,
I mean, but there are flying toilets, aren't there?
Yeah. But did you go there and sort of dodge the flying toilets? Or
I have been there when I was a student and I did see somebody with a flying toilet.
But were you there when you were writing the novel,
No,
Iman?
I wasn't.
Is that fair?
Is it fair that I wrote about a place that I wasn't living in?
Is it fair to describe something you haven't seen or experienced?
I think that if, as writers, we can't see everything that we're
So did you imagine this, Kibra?
I did imagine it, and I also did a lot of research.
As it was 12 years ago?
Yes, and I remember it as a student touring it. I spoke to people that I believed had enough information. My sister works at Red Cross. I spoke to her. She's been there before. I spoke to her. I Googled.
I know, but this is not a personal attack.
No, so I'm telling you.
This is a masterclass.
No, I understand. So
the idea is, how does a young writer... You've written 2 novels, so you've got the credentials, you're on the show, you're chatting about your book. How should a writer go about choosing their locale, for want of a better word?
I think that, personally for me, my first novel was set in Canada, and my second novel was set in Kenya. And when I was writing my first novel, I felt a very close connection to Canada because I had been there for so many years. And when I came back here, I felt a very close connection to Kenya because I was living here now. And I think that you have to write about a place that you feel connected to.
Right.
Whether or not whether or not you know it like maybe somebody who's lived there for 20, 25 years. But there is research. And as a writer, of course, you have a responsibility to do that research if you choose to write about that place. But I wouldn't say that you have to live there for a certain number of years. You don't have to be born in a place to write about it. But it's about research.
Understood. I'm going to read you a bit which I particularly liked. I thought you were flying at the height of your young powers. And here you are. There is Pio Gama Pinto, and we never knew him. But in the person of Raj, who is the father, a sort of revolutionary, we must all unite kind of Indian, he remembers this idea of his admiration for Pio Gama Pinto, a person who didn't exist, and he waits for him every single day to come out of his parking lot just so that he can talk to him. Something which couldn't happen, but you make it happen.
But he did exist.
Right? Yes, he did exist, but this particular scene.
This scene didn't exist.
Exactly, but that's what we're going to, that's what we're going to, what is the buzzword these days? I liked it. I liked the fact that you had a young man waiting patiently for Pio Gama Pinto to come out of the woodwork and chat to him. And, oh gosh, the hero turns up, and I've lost the page. The hero turns up and hails Pinto, little boy, we can see him, he's maybe, what, 10, 11?
Yeah.
How did you become a hero? Eyebrow shooting up. This version of the question was new to him, a strange and uncomfortable thought. Who told you I was a hero? Everyone says so. They say that you're brave, that you freed us from the Wazungu, that even Africans trust you. Pinto's index finger tapped against the steering wheel, his face clouded. Is that what you want, to become a hero? Raj's heart picked up its pace as the dream purred inside him. Isn't that what you do? The car turned off, returning the morning to its previous bird-filled silence. Pinto pushed open the heavy door, and his movements were so agile, so practiced at being invisible, that he was on one knee and face level with Raj before the boy knew what was happening. Truth be told, Pinto started, we all want to be heroes. We all want to make that difference in that moment of time, to be admired for our bravery and respected for our actions. With every word, Raj nodded. Admired, respected. They were the fingers that plucked at his dream, strumming it awake. But as long as you want to be a hero, you will never become one. Raj's excitement faltered. I don't understand. People think I'm brave for spending all those years in jail, for putting up some posters on walls and helping others, but it's not because I'm courageous or a hero, Pinto explained. It's because I know what is right and I'm willing to fight for it. So it's all drum, 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 let's go, barricades down. But in terms of technique, this idea of inventing the past, of invention, is that something that is that going to be a hallmark of an Iman Verjee novel?
I mean, I can't say
Well,
it because
I loved
haven't.
it. I've just said, that's my favorite bit. I'm going to frame it.
I also love reimagining.
Right.
Or
the reimagination.
I love that part because I also feel like it's me speaking to that character that existed, Pio Gamma Pinto, who existed so many years ago, and it's almost like me talking to him and going through that and imagining what he would say. But I don't know if that is something I would use in my next novel. It would depend on the topic and on the way the story goes. But I thought it was important for this specific novel because especially to explain why has Raj become the way Raj has become? Who is Pio Gamma Pinto? And I think Pio Gamma Pinto is such an important figure in our history, and we don't speak about him enough. And I thought that I would give him that small little space to just think about what he must have been thinking and what he must have been feeling, and to sort of depict his bravery. But
this is very lyrical, this is very beautiful, and one of the aims is to draw people to your book, right, so they can read it. Right. That's the whole purpose of this is our own crusade. They'll read the book, but you also go on to describe a break-in. I think I'm right in saying you, let's call it, you describe an assault. Right. And there, it seems to me that you're very curt. So are you saying that the reader should be spared the detail of traumatic experience? You're not going to go there. It's too harsh. Some writers do. I don't think I was sparing my reader when I did that. And I think that is what you also learn when you're doing description or when you're doing a course, to tell you this is as far as you should go. Your responsibility as a writer is to write things in a very thoughtful way. So if I was to write, I was writing about Lena being raped, and that is not an easy topic to address. And I think that it's so easy to go into that, to be careless about it, to be flippant about it. And to even the worst thing possible would be to eroticize that experience, which I did not want to do. And so I tamed down the description, and I decided I will not focus on the physical aspects of it. I'm going to focus on the psychological aspect of how has it affected her. So if you read that scene, you'll see that she goes through fear, she goes through disgust, and then she goes through this period where she feels like she no longer belongs to herself. She's been stolen from herself.
And I thought it was important to focus on that aspect instead of the other side, because this is what is important. This is what people should know. And that's why I did what I did. Not to spare anyone.
Right. I'd like to draw you on another thing that we've drawn others on.
Okay.
And I'll just say it in one line. The description of sex and sexual relations. What is your thinking on that particular rubric?
Personally, if I read books that describe sex in a very explicit way, it puts me off. So I don't do that as a writer. I prefer to go, even if you read my first novel, it's all very subtle. It's all giving hints, but never really explicitly saying what's happening. And I believe the reader is smart enough to figure out what's going on. And if you can say it in a beautiful language. Is it
the Indian movie approach? Where
No,
the lovers will come together, just the lips will about, mumble.
I wouldn't say I was inspired by that. But
Right.
just personally as a writer, I believe you should only write explicitly about sex or even any kind of description in your book if it serves a purpose, if it pushes your story forward. Every single word, every single dialogue, every single description in your book must have a purpose there. It should never just be because you're indulging yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
Avoid self-indulgence.
Exactly.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
a takeaway. Now we're going into the idea of descriptions, and you're the cultural ambassador, the community ambassador. Here is Michael, the hero, so to speak, remembering his grandmother's words about Indians. His grandmother's words stuck, invisible and stubborn between them. You can't trust these people, she had told them. A Mohindi is worse than a snake in the grass. They don't care if you spot them or not. They'll sting you with their poison in broad daylight if it means getting ahead. And in another page, 159, we have another character, and this is now a South Asian lady. Word has got about in the community that a black guy is going out with one of their roses.
I mean, would you?
And so here we are. And so the lady is, that's the problem. They're all liars, she whispered to him, her eyes wide. Most of them are thieves. They can't help it. It's part of their culture. You know this, yet you haven't taught your children anything. They run around with that boy as if he is their, she searched for the word, throwing her arms out, as if he is their best friend. But you wait. One day, you wait and see what happens. So, it seems to me that black folk don't like Indian folk, and Indian folk don't like black folk.
In the mind of Pooja, and in the mind of Michael's grandmother.
Right.
Yes.
So where is the distinction? Where is the subtlety? Where is the nuance?
In terms of?
For the reader, for me, the reader, because I'm believing you. I'm sitting in Saskatchewan.
But
I'm sitting in. I'm in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I'm in Kent, and I read this novel by a brave, audacious young Kenyan writer. I think this must be them. So the question to you in terms of structure is that do you consciously create characters who represent a middle way? Couldn't you have had a chapter with another family who sort of have daily dinners, black on, you know what I'm saying? So as to give it a kind of, I'm believing you. I'm saying that as a writer, I thought, yeah, this is it. This is how Wahindi see Africa, and this is how.
But then you have.
Was that a great shortcoming?
Well, I would say so. I mean, if you're asking me, when you read what Pooja says, or you read what Michael's grandmother says, do I think that my readers will believe that everybody?
No, not everybody.
Or every Kenyan Indian
not
believes that
everybody,
way.
but they will have a vision. They will have a vision of that society. It's a bit like sort of issuing a sort of COVID red light. Don't go to Kenya because you're all going to die. But here we are chatting, so we're not dead yet. So, but you don't the warning. So this is your literary warning signal.
I think I tried to balance that out with the characters of Jay and Michael and Meena, and show that relationship and say that perhaps Pooja's ideas were in the past, Michael's grandmother's ideas were in the past, and now you have these three characters who are forging this new future, this future that we all want. And my intention was for readers to see that and think, maybe people thought like that in the past, but it's no longer like that now, and it will not be like that going into the future.
Right. Well, you know, Iman, I was just, you know, it's as if like we're having a private conversation in a public place. But I would have. Here is the young brother Jai,
yes,
who's also out there with marching with the university students, dealing with the GSU. I wish we had more time. Wonderful descriptions. I mean, in my youth, I sort of went head to head with the GSU, and it's pretty frightening.
That would be interesting, yeah.
It's pretty frightening, and I think you captured what I lived as an 18-year-old in 1973 or whatever. But here we are. Nobody's going to accept Jai. Again, this is buzz talk in Kenyan. He's not even a Kenyan. He's just a Muhindi. You may speak Swahili fluently and have a Kenyan friend. Ivy swept her hand toward Michael, her cheery disposition gone. But we all know what kind of Kenyan you really are, which is what? A member of the elite group who are so out of touch with being Kenyan, it's ridiculous. You probably live in Karen or Runda and went to British private school, the kind all rich kids go to, the kind of Kenyan who doesn't know what it's like to take a matatu until you grow up and decide to be wild with your friends and take one to town just to see what it would feel like.
It's an experience I've gone through.
Right.
And I go through it a lot. People thinking I'm not really Kenyan.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but, okay, I'm saying that there's the messianic zeal. We're agreed. I've written things similar to yours. But there's the same dilemma which confronts me. I wrote a play, and for whatever reason, one of the characters in the play it became clear that was Kikuyu. And the play was actually about corruption. And at the end of the day, all these people, it's a comedy, it's a sort of satirical comedy, all these people steal lots of money, and the man who is really, really clinging on to his bag because he's got millions of sort of like 1,000 shilling notes is the Kikuyu character.
Right.
And says that, oh, we didn't know that Sibi was, we always knew he was a tribalist. I do believe that some people walked out because they had said, but I had created a character. One was a Luo who kept on talking pompously and using big words. One was a Mluya who was trying to be very philosophical and thinking, professor, thinking deep thoughts. I was dealing in stereotypes, but I seem to think that probably it worked against me.
Right.
And I'm saying that, would you accuse yourself of having dealt in stereotypes? Even if you thought it was only a single story?
I hope that I didn't do that, and I never thought that I would do that. I don't think I was dealing with stereotypes. I was trying to show through those certain characters the issues and the challenges that we might face. I can see, I've had people come up to me and tell me that I feel like you have stereotyped this person and you stereotyped that person.
You've stereotyped, you stereotype Kikuyus. You describe how they talk, and they're messing up with their L's and R's. I could probably do the same thing with
I've
Luo.
also stereotyped Indians talking the way Puja talks.
Right.
And maybe that's a lesson.
And that's the question.
Learned.
Actually, that's the question I'm asking you.
Yeah.
Whether you thought there would be a pushback, a backlash.
I
and
didn't
you said,
actually.
I don't care, because I didn't expect that. I didn't expect. I thought people would see these stereotypes for what they were and say, "Oh, how stupid," but they didn't. They took it very, very kindly, unkindly. They thought I depicted, in another play, I depicted Kenya cowboys, KCs. They said, John, how can you call us KCs? We don't wish to be called KCs, but people do call them KCs.
Right.
And in you tell us about a word which you don't like using, but you do use. I had never seen it. People don't go with those kahrias. Is that the pronunciation?
Karia.
Karia.
Yeah.
So karia is a term of abuse, I guess.
I wouldn't say it's a term of abuse. I wouldn't call it a term of abuse. Is it like the N-word in Americanese? I wouldn't call it a term of abuse.
Yeah.
I think it's like a Muindi and a Karia.
Yes.
So how Indians a lot of people within the Indian community use that word. I personally don't like that word. And the reason why I used it in that novel, the reason why I made Pooja especially say it, is because I was trying to show that she is a person who is very stuck in her traditions, very stuck in her little bubble, and she uses that word, and I don't personally agree with it. It was just something that happens within our community.
A rite of passage through which you must go.
Yeah.
And that is to answer my standard questions. What do you read, Iman?
Fiction.
It's too short an answer.
I read fiction. I've been trying to read more African fiction. So I read The Shadow King. I've read Drunk. I'm trying now to read We Are All Birds of Uganda. So I'm focusing a lot more on African fiction, but also focusing on writers who write about the topics that I want to write about. So for example, Sarah Waters is one of my favorite writers, but she's also a very important LGBTQ writer. So I'm reading her now because that is what my next novel will be focusing on.
When do you read, and why do you think it's important to read?
I read mostly in the evenings, but if I really enjoy a book, I read anytime. So while I'm eating lunch, while I'm waiting for the doctor, while I'm in the car, I read everywhere and anywhere as long as I'm enjoying it. And why is it important to read? I think if we're just talking about fiction, because that's what I read, I think that it really makes people more empathetic, more understanding, and it can transport you to places that you might otherwise not be able to go to, and allow you to meet people that perhaps you won't be able to.
Why do you write?
It's really cliche. I write basically to make the world a better place. And I wrote that in my personal statement when I was applying for my master's degree, and now even 15 years later, I still believe that that's true. And I still go with that aim.
Right, so for the viewer who wants to be Iman, Verjee, any secrets you can reveal, any hints that you can give? What does it take to become a successful writer?
I think it takes, like I said, more than just talent. The biggest things are hard work and dedication. You truly have to dedicate yourself to that topic, to that story, because if you don't, there's no way you're going to be able to write it. I mean, you have to feel so passionately for it that you'll wake up at 4:30 in the morning and you'll just start typing it out before your job, get home at 6 o'clock, type it out until 12:30. You have to have such an attachment to that story, such passion for that story, and I think that's the most important thing.
Iman, Verjee, thank you so very much for being on Mbogi ya MaWriters from the Multimedia Library of the Alliance Française de Nairobi. À la prochaine. Till next time.